So this one says, you have used the words consciousness and self frequently today. Could you please explain these two terms in the context of Dhamma? Like consciousness is what we're experiencing now. We're all conscious, I hope. And consciousness is not conditioned out of human ignorance, and so it's natural. This is a realm of consciousness, and so it's also, in terms of Dhamma practice, there's the four elements: the earth, fire, water, and air element, and then space and consciousness. And this always refers to the limitation of condition of space, of earth, fire, water, and air. Always convey the sense of the condition and or having limitation, boundary, quality. And then space consciousness are immeasurables. They have no boundary, and yet they're present here and now. So, whatever state of mind you're in, happy, sad, sane or insane, you're still conscious. And then, so just to make this point about consciousness, like we call it the vijnana or citta, and it's used in different contexts in the Pali Canon. But it's like when a child is born, a baby is born, it has a physical body and it's conscious, and those are, they're natural. That's the karma of having a human body that's conscious. All the animal realm is conscious. Consciousness is everywhere, so it's not just like in my brain or something like that. I see us more like radios. Like a radio doesn't have, music and news in it. It's a machine that you switch on and then it tunes into vibrations and picks up these different radio stations. Just like we, when we're born, then we're functioning from our conscious experiences from this position of the body. So each one of us is conscious, experiencing consciousness from this position. But consciousness is, we're all conscious forms, and the animal world are conscious forms, so they're experiencing consciousness from each fly that irritates you is a conscious being, and it's the center of its universe. It's experiencing consciousness from the body of a fly, just as we are from the body of the human form. And then form is karmic. So the dogs, the cats, the wombats, the kangaroos, the birds and the bees, everything is are conscious forms that experience universal consciousness from the point of their physical form. And so the form of a human being, like we have Buddha images, like here, the beautiful one in the center, is an iconic form of a human being, so it has human form. And then that sense of Buddha is awakened consciousness. So this is what the Buddha was pointing to, was a human form, conscious and awakened to ultimate truth, ultimate reality. And so this is what the Buddha's teachings are pointing to, is to awaken to Dhamma, to ultimate reality, rather than through just the karmic conditions we find ourselves experiencing. And then the self, of course, is the limitation we always put on ourselves by binding ourselves to the form and identifying with it. Then we're trapped within the forms that we're experiencing consciousness with. So we become personalities, we become men, women, we become Asian, European, Australian, and all the rest, through the self view, this sense of attaching out of ignorance to the conditions. So when that attachment then always limits us to the forces of habit, to the conditioning that we've acquired, and to the ethnic attitudes, religious attitudes that we've been conditioned by. So that's why, the human population is each one of us is a conscious being. The consciousness is the same for all of us. It's not, an Ajahn Sumedho consciousness is different from an Ajahn Kalyano consciousness. The form is different, the body is different. And so this is, to reflect on this. So then we begin to, in terms of compassion and spreading loving kindness and things, when people ask in England, about spreading metta, does that really go anywhere? When we, and we, is it just being sentimental and sweet about life and thinking nice thoughts? Or does it have a power that isn't just sentimental niceness? And of course, if you pursue this reflection on consciousness, then you're getting beyond the limitation that we see, that we perceive, conditioned to perceive ourselves always within the limitation of the form and the place we're in. And you realize a universal connection, a oneness rather than this endless separateness that we tend to see and identify and cling to, this separate body and my views and opinions and loves and hates and that I cling to out of habit, or through awareness see the suffering through that binding to limitation and to birth and death. You actually bind it in, just contemplate by identifying with your body. Where's it taking you? It's taking you to death. We're all going to die. And so you're, by seeing yourself as a physical body, then, and only that, then you see, you're clinging to something that's dying, that's limited, gets old, gets sick, and dies. And of course, a lot of people suffer about getting old, and like cosmetic surgery and the efforts to try to maintain the illusion of youth. In Bangkok, I went to this medical building, the dentist, kind of very posh, elegant building in Bangkok, where they have a huge area called absolute beauty. And there are people desperate to be beautiful, stay beautiful, or get more beautiful, or aging people, go there to try to disguise the aging process. So I asked the dentist, I think, would it help me any? Think I'd look better if I went to this shop? But anyway, I mean, this thing, vanity, like vanity, obsessive concern about your appearance is always, you're always limited to that. And vanity is very cruel because, you're always comparing yourself with perfect forms and models male-female perfection, and then you always see something wrong with yourself. So it's a kind of cruelty, isn't it? A kind of criticism of your body, because it's never as maybe as you would like it to be, according to an ideal of perfection. And so that's a kind of vanity is actually a self-inflicted cruelty, where metta is, loving kindness. It's non-conditioned. It's not about, I send you metta when you praise me, but when you start blaming me, then no more metta comes your way. It's about unconditioned, uncriticalness, allowing things to be what they are without, conditions placed on them. And then this goodness, say loving kindness, love, compassion, come from this universal intelligence rather than from me personally. It's not like I generate loving kindness as a personal gift. But as you see through the self, the limitation of self, then you're connected to universality, oneness, rather than just the limitation that you find yourself conditioned with. And this one says, is it correct to say that seeing the reality is the main object of our endeavor? That will make us understand that there is no self and stop our birth and death cycle. Well, the birth and death cycle, once it, say on the physical level, like even in the scripture, the Buddha had to get old and get sick and die, just like any other creature. Except, it wasn't the Buddha that died, it was the body, physical body that was born. And so, knowing, this is like a fulfillment of a human birth. Like in it's where rebirth no longer happens, is through this mindfulness. Because when you realize ultimate reality, then that's it. You've finished. You're finished with the birth and death cycles. But your body still goes through its process of aging. And so after the Buddha was enlightened, then he lived many years establishing monastic sangha and so forth. So out of compassion, he in the scripture, he established conventions that would be carried through time, through different, through periods. So this is this teaching of the Four Noble Truths, if I'm right, was established to be carried through time 5,000 years. So, in 1956, that was the 2,500th year, halfway mark. So we're on the other side. Of course, there's quite a few years left, but so don't worry about that. But when you contemplate, how many enlightened beings have, how many human beings have been enlightened, but have left no convention to follow. So this is like in this context, the Buddha established a conventional form. So that's the Dhamma Vinaya that we use. So, and so he said, I leave you the Dhamma Vinaya. And so that we've protected, through all these 2,552 years. The convention, the Bhikkhu Sangha has survived through 2,552 years, and it's in a relatively, uncorrupted form. There are corrupt bhikkhus, yes, but basically the ideal is to the Vinaya, practice the Vinaya, which keeps us, in alignment with that convention, and then practice the Dhamma, practice according to the Dhamma teachings. So that still exists. That's always amazes me when you think of how many conventions have survived 2,552 years and still are being used and still uncorrupted, untainted through the rise and fall of empires and kingdoms and political upheavals. And then in the 80s, I remember 1980s, Buddhists were saying, well, Buddhism seems to be dying out because of communism. It was destroyed in Mongolia and China, and then people were saying, like in Thailand, that Buddhists were always poor. Why couldn't they be, and it's the Christian countries that were rich and powerful, and the Christian missionaries, I think, were pushing this a bit, and and so then suddenly, the Buddhist countries start becoming wealthy, and so is it, what is it? But in actuality, like Theravada Buddhism, that is in its teaching, like the first sermon of the Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. That's the first sermon, and that is quite remarkable, isn't it? That is what we use. That's what Luang Por Chah was always using for, as a reference to reflect from the Four Noble Truths. So, the teaching has never been corrupted. That Four Noble Truths is exactly the same as it was at the time it was given to the 5 disciples in Sarnath. It's not a kind of modern version of the Four Noble Truths, New Age version or British version of Buddhism. It's it still carries this tradition that has survived, and I really respect that because it amazes me really that it's being appreciated now in countries like this, or in Europe or America, where before there was no interest in it, or no ability for Westerners to appreciate or understand Buddhist teachings. It's only in the past 50 years, really, that the Western world has, there have been individuals, unique individuals, like in Britain or that, in Germany, that have understood Buddhism in the past, but large numbers there's never been of great interest or appreciated till the past 50 years by ordinary, say, Americans or Europeans. Why is that? Why now do they suddenly find Buddhism so interesting? And my response is that it is a wisdom teaching, and it is a way to, and that's something we lack in Western culture. We don't have wisdom. And so we have intelligence, and we have modern science, and so we're quite gifted in manipulating conditioned phenomena, to do things, different things. But in terms of wisdom, we don't have it, and that's why many of us have had to turn to Buddhism to find that. We don't see it in our own cultural context or in our own religions. Sometimes during my practice I experience vibration, sensation in the body accompanied by a heat and then a tingling sensation. Then they pass away and I return to a normal state of mind, neutral. What should I become mindful of during these experiences? Well, you seem to be mindful of them. It's like mindfulness does, and concentration will, the body will have its various reactions to that. So, because like, say, for example, creatures of habit, we become conditioned to through experience from childhood, from early childhood up to the present, to hold the body, to control the body, to this sense of controlling and making it do what we want. And so in meditation, you're no longer trying to control and make it do what you want. And of course, like sitting still for 45 minutes, hour, is something that is not normally what one does in the cultural context. This is like meditation. And the body, is used to maybe, different activities, restless activities. And so it will, have very strange kind of reactions, sometimes very strong movements and jerks and things. It's all right, just be aware of them and not try to control or to suppress, but also to be patient and aware of what is actually happening in the present, whether it's physical reactions or emotional reactions or conditions that arise in your mind in the present moment. You see, our position then is of open attention, not criticizing, not controlling, but observing. All conditions are impermanent and not self. This is, what is your view on Christianity belief that if we do not accept God, we will be condemned to eternal hell? For us Buddhists, we believe in triple gem and personal salvation. Now, well, this is, the Christianity, of course, is many different interpretations, and so some are very kind of what they call fundamentalists, either you believe or you go to hell, kind of very extreme interpretation, very dualistic, it's either this or eternal hell, which seems horrible, in fact. So, and I know Christians that deny that that's the real meaning. So there's different aspects, like fundamentalists, and there's different. There's mystical Christianity, and that. So it has many different styles to it. But this is contemplate for yourself. Like the word God is because myself being brought up as a Christian, this is part of a cultural conditioning. So the word God is when I was in my late teens, I became disillusioned with Christianity, and because of that I kind of had became cynical and critical, and made fun of the word God and slandered it and things like this, made jokes, I remember, and this kind of smart, clever university students like to do. And then, but then in like with meditation, I found that like Buddhist meditation is you're using language in a different way than saying you have to believe in this concept. Because what is the word itself, God, is a concept, is a word, it's a perception. In the reality of it at this moment, it's a 3-letter word. And then it's an English word, which is which implies, and it's used in the Christian religion. So that's how it's a conventional form like any other word. And then you're supposed to believe in God or go to eternal hell. This is another perception or way of clinging to an interpretation of that word. But in more mystical forms of Christianity, there's the fundamentalists, which are quite literal interpretations and very black and white ways of thinking. It's the critical mind, in other words, that operates. And where in the mystical forms, it's intuition. So you have intuitive Christianity or mystical Christianity, which is based on a direct experience of what we would call Dhamma, and Christian mystics would call God. Now the difference is God tends to be personified. It's always presented to us as a father figure, patriarchal form. When we talk about God, it's and then we think of an old man with a white beard up in the sky. That's a childish version. But it is, you do have, you try to create an image of God, and it's usually a male figure, a kind of patriarchal male. But try to do that with Dhamma. It has no, it has like this morning talking about the unborn, uncreated, unconditioned. You can't imagine it. Dhamma is a word that embraces everything, so it doesn't have. You can't make a Dhamma rupa. You can't, and make it look like a male or a female. It has. You use a symbol, maybe like a Dhammajaka wheel, like outside the Sima boundary markers or Dhammajakas. That's the symbol for Dhamma. But it's not Dhamma isn't a wheel. And so this is just noting that in Buddhism you've got Buddha, which can be. It can be formed. You can have Buddha rupas, because they represent, I mean, in a human form. So they're not like, they're not devatas or angels or anything. Say a kind of iconic, stylized human form, recognizable. It has a male image, but it's really not about gender or anything. It's the ability that human beings have to pay attention and be aware of Dhamma. So Buddha is that which allows us to know ultimate reality, Buddha, Dhamma. And then Sangha brings it down to you and myself, practicing. So it's not about personality anymore, about male, female, or these kind of divisions, but about practicing in the right way, practicing with mindfulness and seeing clearly, rather than about who has attained and who hasn't. So there's a lot of interest in, in who's an arahant and who's not, and who is a Sotapanna, stream enterer, or whatever. And in Thailand, of course, people get caught up in this, they're trying to, which Ajahns are arahants and so forth, and it goes on like that. That's speculation, because it's not a matter of you never become an arahant as a person. It's not personal. The stages, Sotapanna, Sakadha, Kamayana, Arahant, when you grasp them as personal identities, then that's Sakkaya Ditthi. So for like a Buddhist monk, we're forbidden to claim these stages. Especially, it's a disrobing offense if I deliberately deceive you by telling you I've attained these stages. It's one of the 4 serious offenses. And then it's also an offense if I go around telling people I think I'm an arahant, and I go around telling people. Maybe I'm just deluded. I'm not trying to put one over on you. Maybe you have moments in your monastic life where you think you are. So then in terms of awareness, you're getting beyond the self, the identity, the limitation of form. And these are merely instructive, helpful teachings to be able to contemplate the realities that you're experiencing. So nobody becomes an arahant. My personality will never be enlightened. It's not about that. It's about letting go of self. And it's about anatta, not about Ajahn Sumedho is attained or not. It doesn't make sense anymore to think in those terms. So rather than trying to figure out who is or who isn't, what level are you, you've got very clear directions in like the 10 fetters and the 4 stages. These are really guidelines that you can check out for yourself. And so like the first 3 fetters, Sakkaya Ditthi, Silabbata Paramasa, Vicikicca, are about human conditioning. It's about cultural conditioning, about language conditioning, about the ego. And so that's what prevents all of us when we get lost in the conditioning process, cultural conditioning, force of habit, the ego and the language. It blocks off the path of liberation. We can't see it. We kind of maybe have views and opinions about it, is the best we can do from the level of Sakkaya Ditthi. But So that Sakkaya Ditthi is like the personality view or the ego or the sense of a separate self. That's a fetter, and that's the first fetter. And you acquire that after you're born, so you develop this sense of yourself, an identity with the body, and so forth is developed through cultural conditioning, and then the languages that we learn, affect how we see, how we think, the thinking process. But because of the Buddha's emphasis on mindfulness, then this mindfulness puts us into the universal consciousness, or mindfulness, a path to the deathless awareness, and then we can see, then we have perspective on the first three fetters. We can see, the ego operating, or the cultural assumptions, conceits and attitudes that we acquire through cultural conditioning, or the limitation of our thinking process, our language, which always leads to the third fetter. When you attach to thinking as your vehicle, you'll always end up with vicikiccha, a doubt. There's always could be something else, Thinking is a limited, it's a tool, a skillful tool, but as an end in itself, it can never liberate you. So it can be one of the fetters or one of the obstructions to the path. That's why, what I've been talking about is to get to know these fetters. It's not to get rid of the self or to stop thinking or to eradicate your cultural conditioning. Not about annihilation, but it's about seeing things as they are. That these are conditions arising and ceasing. They bind us to the limitation of the conditioning, cultural biases, cultural prejudices, conditions that we acquire through human ignorance and the limitation of the thinking process. So I mean, this is like it's in you. As you use these teachings, they're very precise teachings. They're not fuzzy, kind of speculative theories about the nature of existence. They're very direct and practical. So if somebody says you're going to hell because you don't believe in God, don't worry about it. Is there any advice for laity with interest in going forth? Would there be exception for those who come from single child families? I don't know. Well, like going forth, this attitude of going forth is, it's on a conventional form, like becoming an agarika or it's where it's like you're going out of the worldly state, and it's into the unknown. Like, it's like this idea, like going into the unknown, because you don't know what's going to happen. You're putting yourself in, like for a bhikkhu, you're putting yourself in this state of alms mendicancy, there's no guarantee that you will be given any food or whatever. So so going forth to me is like an act of faith and confidence that we have, because it's you're going into the unknown. Where, say, on the worldly level, we always want security, or we want to know what's happening and what, like coming to traveling to Australia and so forth. You have to make sure you have medical insurance. And nowadays, my age, it costs a lot of money to, old man like myself pop off any time and be the burden of Australia. It's not, governments, they want to make sure that I'm not going to, be an inconvenience to the Australians. So we have to have security. But actually the idea is going forth, not having insurance. But on the legal level, that we have to also adapt to the necessities of fate. But like they see this as, we all have this, the bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, the samana, the anagarika. These are forms established by the Buddha in India. So these forms are kind of like giving up the world. They're all about relinquishing and living on alms. So this is, this is just so it's moving out of the worldly secure, the family, all that we depend on and feel secure with, into the unknown. Well, that can be rather frightening when you really contemplate it, because the unknown is like, what we're most dread. Anything could happen. So, but also, some of us have been able to devote our lives to this going forth. And so I have not had any obstructions from family or other conditions. But I had nothing to bind me, to prevent me from going forth, say in family or in duties or anything else. In America, we're brought up to be independent. And my parents, when I was 18 years old, said, "Okay, now you're independent. We're no longer responsible for you." So I've always operated from that position. And in one way, it kind of, part of me, wanted them to support me through university and that, but I ended up having to do it all myself, because my parents said, "Off you go" at 18, and off I went. And so I have, because of that, I haven't had a lot of duties and that sense of parental interference, because even though they weren't particularly overjoyed about me becoming a Buddhist monk, they realized that I was free to do what I wanted according to their values. So, whereas some of the monks and nuns have a lot of problems with their parents. When I get bad news, I can't stop thinking about it. I can't concentrate on anything. How do I get myself back to a reasonable state of mind? yeah, I think we all have this problem. that his bad news is bad news, and and it affects us emotionally. So I mean, that's where this mindfulness, being aware, wanting to get rid of the, like, say, bad news or kind of threatening news or situations that you feel threatened or make you anxious or worried. And so this is about the future, the time element, and it's about really brings up the sense of self. And so that's why to cultivate this awareness, which is timeless, it's not about time anymore. It's about here and now, and then the time conditions can be seen more, and you can use your own emotional reactions to situations for practice. What I've done over the years is to use the bad news and when I personally feel threatened by something or other, by somebody, because just to observe the emotional reaction that's triggered off through getting bad news is like this. And then, of course, it is being patient, because there's a tremendous desire to stop thinking about it, because you kind of get obsessed with the worry or anxiety about it, and then there's also a strong desire, like BuddhaBodhivana, to get rid of it, to get out of it, run away from it. So, like, patient endurance is necessary to bear with one's karma, one's vipaka karma, and learn from it. I try to be mindful and watch my thoughts, but I still get carried away by them. Is this normal, or is there a technique I can use to skillfully observe my thoughts? Notice the nature of thinking. The thinking process is conditioned, so one thought arises and then it connects to another. And so it's like proliferating thinking, isn't it? So that's the nature of thought. It's linear, it's time-bound. You can only have one thought moment. You can only have one thought at a time. You can't have two thoughts at the same moment. And then thinking is a habit. We're very bound into thinking, trying to figure out everything in terms of in terms of time. Thinking is all about time, about past and the future, and the present. Even the present is doing something now to get something in the future. Or maybe we're sitting here worrying about bad things we've done in the past. We can feel guilty and worry about being punished for bad actions or that we might have committed in the past. So the self-view is a time-bound condition, and the thinking process increases that. You can always imagine something in the future, of being, and there's a sense of you should be punished in the future for bad actions you've done in the past. And then the death of the body is the ultimate unknown in terms of here and now. So we can't try to imagine what happened. When people ask me what happens when somebody dies, the honest answer is I don't know, because I haven't died yet. there are various theories and views about it, but in terms of Dhamma, the refuge then is in the deathless. So I kind of emphasize this word, the deathless, amatta Dhamma, and then the death of the body, in terms of watching the end of conditioned phenomena in your mind, that will do it. Or, a thought arises and ceases, or emotion of love or hate or whatever arises and ceases in the mind. And through the awareness of it, then you see its birth, its presence, and its death. And so cessation is the death of conditioned phenomena. But your refuge is in the deathless. And there's in the Dhammapada, one of my favorite quotes from Dhammapada is the appamado amattapadang. It's a heedfulness, or being mindful, is the path to the deathless. So you have appamado, which means being heedful, paying attention, is the way to the amattapadang, or the deathless path. No, this is appamado amattapadang, pamado machuno padang, which is the second verse, is heedlessness, not being mindful, is the way to death. Machuno padang. So you have amattapadang, the deathless, machuno padang, death. So mindfulness is the way to the deathless, heedlessness, being not mindful, being heedless, is the way to death. And then appamado namiyanti, the third verse, appamado namiyanti, being mindful is never dying, is never dying. And ye pamadaya tamada is heedlessness is dying every moment. Contemplate that, heedlessness is the experience of death. You're experiencing death all the time, but you don't notice. and as you're developing awareness, then you're realizing, recognizing amattapadang, deathlessness, in which the death-bound conditions are in perspective. Then there's nothing to fear, is there? Nothing to fear. And so when the body dies, that's its nature, it's supposed to do that. And it's no longer me or mine. But I have yet to experience physical death, as you can see. So watching thoughts and so forth is one thing that I've done all kinds of experiments with this, and what I was saying last night, I think, about observing your thinking, to deliberately think, so with the intention of observing. So I would take some kind of neutral sentence, that doesn't arouse any emotion or any feeling in my mind, like I am a human being, something like that. Doesn't bring up any strong feelings, just a kind of statement of conventional fact. So, but then you're taking this sentence not to kind of to question it in terms of making it into analyze it, but to recognize the thinking process. The sense of I is a thought that arises. It's a conditioning, an English pronoun, isn't it? That we've learned, that say we've acquired after birth. So I, and then when you can deliberately, intentionally watch yourself thinking, by intentionally thinking, you're mindful of just thinking the word I. And it arises and ceases in the moment. You can't sustain the word I. You can kind of repeat it over and over again, but it, in terms of the reality, you determine to think, and the I, and then it's present, then it's gone. And so then the thinking process is, and then it's connected to am a human being, which is proper English grammar, so it's grammatically correct, and so we try to learn a particular language through using its grammatical structures. And so this is a training, a conditioning process that you acquire. And then but each word arises and ceases in the moment. And because it's neutral, it doesn't bring any strong emotional reaction. It doesn't, the emotions don't, at least not with me, thinking I'm a human being doesn't bring up any strong feeling whatsoever. It's just using a statement, a conventional identity. But the aim is to be the observer of the thinking and of the pronoun I, because that always implies me as I am Ajahn Sumedho. I am, it's a statement of my presence. I'm announcing my separateness as something different from yours. It puts me in a position of separate relationship to you, and then by defining I as I am a human being, then it's also defining myself as a species, and then I go into more personal things like I am a good Buddhist monk, or I'm not a very good Buddhist monk. Then it gets into more kind of emotional things about the value, something that can bring up emotion about self-worth and good and bad, right and wrong. And so but that which is aware is not the thinking, you see. And this is why I emphasize this is for you to discern the difference between pure awareness from the position, because we all have to experience consciousness from this position, this human form that we identify with, and how we identify with it. This is my body is a an identity of with the form, the human form, and all that implies on a cultural level. I am an American, or I am a man, or a Buddhist monk, or whatever. I'm, then it goes into more kind of value judgments or personal separation that separate me from others. Actually, the simple statement "I am" is just an announcement of being. It's not personal even. When you really look at just that, the pronoun and the verb "I am" is a statement of presence, like the Buddha used it when he met the ascetic after his enlightenment. I am the enlightened one. And that wasn't coming from Sakkaya Ditthi or a sense of self. It's a statement of truth. But because, and I don't think the Buddha was speaking English at the time. So whatever, it was in Sanskrit or Pali, whatever, I don't know, but this is all, that I'm just using the English language because that's what I know. But just in my own experience, like you contemplate it in your own mind, I am, it doesn't define me as separate. It's just merely a statement of presence. And then I am Ajahn Sumedho, that defines me as separate from you. You aren't Ajahn Sumedho and I am. So then that's a statement of I'm separate from you. And so this is a way of exploring, listening to these concepts that we have, but our relationship to them is of awareness rather than identity. So it's a way of get perspective on thinking. Then in terms of fears and threats, things that really push your button, they use this word, pushing your button, or really there's certain things that we're most frightened of and dread in our lives on a personal level. So this is, so we have our lives, we worry about what people think of us, what people are going to say, about, we fear being rejected and criticized and dismissed or humiliated, made fun of, as a personality. I dread being humiliated in public, being made to look like a fool in public. That, I personally dread that. And so, this is, but then seeing this, being able to recognize this and exploring this threat, but maybe sometime this could happen, or when I feel that it is happening, what I recommend is of course mindfulness, be something to learn from. So in my own experience, I've used those situations to find out where my weak points are, where I lose it, what I most, where I blow it, in other words, and where I have no mindfulness. And so one observes, learns from experience where your Achilles heel or your weak spot or where you're most vulnerable. Don't, take an interest in it, because from that point then you begin to use sati panya rather than just suppression and running away and dread of possibilities of humiliation in the future. Now that's exploring, listening to one's own thinking, and then the spaces between the words, like I, and then the word ceases, and then there's a space, there's an empty space. So you're discerning the relationship of a word to emptiness around it. So this is mindful, you're aware, and you intentionally think I. Before you think I, it's empty. You can be aware, discern this empty point before you think the word, and then you deliberately think I, and then there's another empty space. Well, this just seems rather small, but it is making a point, isn't it, of how space and form relate to each other. For example, in this hall, in this temple, it's a big space. But when we come in, we tend to look at the shrine, at the Buddha image, at the monks, at each other. We look out the windows, and we notice the things. And so usually we just are going from one thing to another, and then we look at this, the shrine, then it goes from one thing to another. So we notice the people and the room itself and the things in the room. But the space, even though it's here and now, and we're in it, we're sitting right in it, experience it, we may not consciously notice it. We just take it for granted. And yet the space is the most important factor at this moment in this room. We couldn't be here all in the same, if this was just solid concrete. So space is the important one of all of them, more important than the shrine or anything else. So, and yet it's the least noticed or consciously noted. And so, but this is like visual consciousness through sight. Just when I say look at space, you can suddenly recognize it. It's not subtle or, only an advanced human meditator can ever really know space. It's just, look, it's here and now. Consciousness is the same. It's here and now. It's nothing esoteric or subtle or anything. It's just, it's like space. It's here and now, but we never notice it. We never pay attention to that because we're conditioned to go from one thing to another. And that's the conditioning. So this awakening puts us in this discerning space and form, one from the other. So we get perspective, like we have perspective. So I see you in space and noticing the space between you. In my early life at Wat Pah Pong, I used to try to, sitting in the sala meditating or chanting with other monks. So the asana thong, the platform where the monks sit, is filled with Buddhist monks. And then as you develop, this monk, I like this monk I don't like very much, this one is this name, and this one is really why, that one is stupid. And so you start, you start projecting all kinds of your personal reactions, emotional reactions to the individual monks. So I used to practice, instead of doing that, I'm just looking at the gaps between the monks, like I noticed the space between monks. Because it's here and now, and it's obvious, but one consciously doesn't notice that till you decide to. You have to make a special determination. Well, the space between you is not, I like the space between you better than that. It doesn't bring out my personal preferences. So you notice this, you're aware of, it's like you're filling out, you're not just being caught in the proliferating habits of going from one thing to the next. Then also, I teach my own kind of, how much time do I have left?
Would you like Luang Por to continue talking? Okay. Maybe another one or two questions, Luang Por.
Well, as I became calmer, and more patient in practice, then I began to notice this kind of ringing background. There's a kind of vibratory background called sound of silence, so I began to notice this, and I began to notice that if I, stayed with this, then I'd get perspective on, I would, the sense of a self drops away, separateness, and it's like you get this vast sense of spaciousness in consciousness that connects, because it's like a vibration or stream. It has a continuity, and it's not exciting or repulsive. It's just subtle and unnoticeable. It's not generally noticed. So just noticing that, then I could sustain awareness. Connected awareness would connect, and from this point then I could observe the thinking process or emotional habits that would arise. So these are just skillful means that I found useful. Like the real insight into anatta was through this, by recognizing this vibration. It's like it's not really a sound, but it's the background of everything. And so when it's like it seems like a sound to me, but you can hear it behind everything, behind any music or noise or cacophonous noise, or behind any kind of music. It's even very strong, like with Mozart and things like that. And then I teach in a retreat every year in Chiang Mai, up in the mountains, where they have this waterfall, and a stream. That they built the meditation hall over a stream. So go up there every year, and there's this noisy waterfall, so it's very strong, and the flowing stream, and then the sound of silence is even more. It doesn't destroy sound. It puts perspective on even sounds that are similar, like the flowing of a stream, or water falling, or rain falling. So this is, beginning to investigate experience, and with seeing of how things actually are. Like with this sound of silence, then I begin to notice that when I stay in this empty state, the stillness of the mind, there's no sense of a self. There's no sense of me, the thoughts of me and memories and the separateness aren't there. It's empty of self, and it's discerning it. It's not imagined. And then I can create myself, I start thinking about myself, and I arise as a personality. But if I don't do that, then there's no self. So anatta is a reality. It's not just suppressing personality or getting rid of the personality, but having perspective on personal identities and conditioning. So that, these are ways that I've learned to deal, to not get wound up in endless proliferating thoughts, or fighting, resisting thinking, but observing. So sometimes a broken glass, no matter how much you patch it up, one day it will open up again. What do you think about that we should get a new glass, or should we keep using the old one with a lot of suffering? In terms of glass, I just recommend getting a new one. But also we have to do what we can with what we have. Like the physical body, it's like this. So, and so we can think of maybe having a healthier or better one, but resign yourself to learn from the one you have. This is what you learn from, whatever condition it is in. So it's like suddenly you're not looking at somebody, a healthy person, I wish I were like him. He's young and healthy and strong, he can do all these things, and I'm old and weak. And then, that's sakya ditti. But being old and weak is like this, so it's not a matter of trying to envy somebody else, but seeing through that, seeing that envying somebody else is suffering. But and but to learn from the way these conditions are, whatever pleasurable or painful states they happen to be in the present. That's why, like disabilities or people with chronic pain, terminal illnesses, and things like this are, this is not an obstruction to liberation. The obstruction of liberation is always Sakaya Ditti, Sila Bhatta Paramasa Vicikicca, the first three fetters. So if you determine I'm disabled, so I can't really practice, then you attach to that view, then of course you're stuck there. You bound yourself, change yourself to disability. But if you see like physical disability and able to reflect on it and your own emotional reactions to it, then you learn. It's your path, what you learn from, your karma. We each have different karmic paths to learn from, different conditions. So I'll stop here. There's still plenty of questions, but